Well, I'm sure you have a million questions, but if you do, I have this microphone, or I have the cards, so if anybody has any cards they want to bring forward, or if they'd rather ask a question via the microphone, feel free. Does anybody have any that they'd like to submit forward? If not, we can start the Q&A with this microphone. So.
I'll be more than happy.
Okay, thank you so much. When I first started getting into all this, my drive was this data stuff. And it's expanded to be just as concerned about all the things that you just discussed. In addressing data, I've read the explanations from superintendents and principals that we've got laws and so forth, and you read the state law and it says parents have the right to prevent data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, except for regulation such and such at the bottom, which then you go back to, which is FERPA, which, so I guess my underlying point or question would be, in federal law, it always trumps, does it not,
Yes.
state laws and local regulations. If we were to try to do anything in the data world, it's going to have to be dealt with on a federal level. Is that correct? Or is there a way for, say, a parent to stop it? You know, say, I'm going to jump in here and say no, even though you say I don't, you could do this without my permission, I guess.
The way that you as a parent, that's a really good question, and the answer has levels. The way that you as a parent stop it is anywhere possible deny them the data. So, for example, at the beginning of the year, my kids got, and since it was a federal program, I'm sure you do too, for school lunches you get that form that, you know, what's your income level, blah, 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 and the kids are told you have to fill it out and send it back. And every year, I filled it out, I wrote NA on every line, and sent it back. I filled it out. They couldn't complain. You need to remember there's a difference between when the law says that they must ask, the law doesn't say you must answer. And so the first level of this is to teach parents, don't give them data you don't want them to have. Like, hold back as much data as you can, and teach your children to do the same. Because kids will tell you, you know, they tell you anything. I had a second grade little one year, and when the mom came in for the parent-teacher conference, I said, so I understand you and your husband are getting a divorce. Is there, you know, and she went, how did you know? You get your kid 7, right? The whole school knows. He's 7. He's told everybody. So you teach your children to be able to say no, to recognize questions that don't need to be answered, and that's something you can do at home. At the school level, every state's a little bit different, so I'm going to give you more generic advice because I don't know exactly what your regs say on this, but most of the time you can go in and say, I want to see all the information that's collected on little Johnny. You won't necessarily get all of it, but you'll get a bunch of it. You can't take it out, but you can at least look at it, so you have some idea of what's going on. At the state level, a lot of states are starting to, like in my state of Pennsylvania, they passed legislation saying the schools couldn't collect social security numbers. Technically, you don't have to give them your social security number anyway, but so Pennsylvania's database doesn't have the children's social security numbers because the state legislature specifically, by legislation, forbade them. Now, eventually that'll be a tussle, but that's where we are right now. So you can do that kind of stuff, and what you do is you start creating pushbacks with the feds, and many states are doing that, saying, no, we're not going to give you the data. And that's a good thing to do because the more states that step up to that plate, the better. And then you take this to your elected federal representatives. You have 1 congressman here, because I'm in Rhode Island, 1 congressman, and your 2 senators. And you talk to them about your concerns. Some of the concerns aren't even what they're collecting, it's that it's not secure. There have been breaches. I mean, there's breaches, you don't have to look very far. So that's also a concern. So you kind of have to fight it at every level. But it doesn't mean there's nothing you could do at the state level. You just have to be kind of specific about it. But stripping out the social security numbers is actually quite helpful, especially because when people try to steal an identity, they write it on an SSN number. So if you strip those out, then you're helping to protect the identity of your kids, because we're seeing some of that begin to happen as well. So it's like you need to look for specific things like that you can do.
Very good, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Is this on?
You are on.
Oh, you just, I may have to, hold on a second.
I probably don't.
No, it's all right.
Yeah.
No,
Told I
it's
have
this
a
thing.
big mouth.
There you go.
Hi. Just a little background. I taught for almost 3 decades. In 2011, I did some research on Bill Gates, put up a bulletin board in the teacher's room where no one could see it except the teachers, and was threatened to take it down. So I speak to that often because many, many people think, wow, what a great guy, giving all this money. He's a philanthropist. He's phenomenal. Why would you speak out against him? So the question I have is, when people ask why, how do we answer?
Well, I use Microsoft's, as I did tonight, I use Microsoft's internal memo saying, yeah, all this is going to be online, and Apple doesn't apply, and you need, everybody in the school districts have to spend all of this, and they need hardware, and they need the latest program. Why do you think? It's their own memo.
Well, and I also mean a little even more globally. Why are all of these people, why are all the Department of Eds, why is it all happening? Why are they all ready to sell our children out? Is it money? Is that the answer?
Yes, that's the shortest answer. There's really 2 philosophies at war. What is the mission and purpose of education? In America, public education has always been about the fact that your past did not have to determine your future. That education was a pathway that was an equalizer. You know, it created the Dr. Ben Carsons of the world, which, whenever you think about him politically, he's a guy who came from the slums of Chicago and is a leading neurosurgeon, pediatric neurosurgeon. That's quite an accomplishment. So, and he did it because there was an educational system that allowed it. And that's one worldview that has been the dominant one in American education, with local control and all the ability. This one says the purpose of education is to create a workforce, and that we begin tracking the children in preschool. If I can pull this up, let me see if I can do this while I'm talking to you. We begin tracking the children in preschool. Where's Delaware? And by the time they're in 8th grade, they get a list of subjects that they're supposed to, come on, Dom, there you go, a list of subjects that they're supposed to be involved in. These are your careers that we want you to have, and everything that is geared toward that. So this is Delaware. Delaware got phase 1, race to the top money. So they and Tennessee are like far ahead. Tennessee had such an outcry against it that there was a huge problem. But Delaware, they're now beginning to fight back, but they got a lot of traction before they began. And this is just Delaware's presentation. I work in many states and they each get their own, which was a mistake on my part, because a lot of work. So in Delaware, they begin with all of by kindergarten they get an entry assessment, where the kids are evaluated before they go into kindergarten. Actually, you're moving into that in Rhode Island too, because you're one of the early childhood, you got an early childhood learning challenge grant, so you're actually going to be doing this as well. And they evaluate the kids, and they evaluate all of their physical, emotional, and behavioral health. And remember, these evaluations are not done by people who are trained psychometricians. These are daycare workers and aides. Now, I will tell you, having actually tested little people, it's really hard to test a 4-year-old. Did you ever see the movie Up?
Yeah.
You know the dog? Woof, 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 squirrel. Yeah, that's a 4-year-old. So you're talking to them, and all of a sudden there's a ball. Look at that, it's amazing. So it's really, really hard to evaluate a 4-year-old because they're 4. Their attention span is slightly shorter than that of a gnat. And so it's hard to get an actual reading. So if you don't actually know what you're doing, it can be easy to get lost in this process. But they start with there's an early childhood assessment in Delaware, beginning with all of the daycare centers. So even at the age of 1, if they're in a daycare center, they have to be assessed at least once a year. Then the assessment moves on. It's their language and literacy, cognition, approaches to learning, physical well-being, motor development, social and emotional development, and it's all observational, and then all of those observations by non-professional psychometricians are entered into the computer-based system. Now, little boys develop more slowly than little girls. So they'll get a lower score right here. And kids, of course, from a lower socioeconomic background are also going to get a lower score, as will LD kids, kids with any kind of problem. They're going to get a lower score entered into the data system. This all gets collected, and then in Delaware, by the time that the kids, they get when they get to school, it moves into a dashboard, and we include all of the aggregate data from all the existing sources, so we get a comprehensive, here's the comprehensive view of each child. There's all their biography and all the things that we've collected on the child, all of the evaluations that have been collected on the child. And then they have to put together, by the time that they are in 8th grade. Delaware does things you don't do. By the time they're in 8th grade, they have to have what's called a student success plan. So here's their student success plan. The state, it's a requirement, it's a diploma, it's a personalized plan, and it tracks the kids. So it's based on tracking, it's a personalized plan. The kids have to develop it. They put it together, and it's what career you're going to have. It's like an individualized education plan, like an IEP, as if every kid's special ed. And it's called a career cruiser. It's password protected. Parents and guardians can look at their child's student success plan, but they can't change it. So you can't change this plan for your child. You can just look at it. And what they get is all of the activities that have been, all of the things that have been put together, and all of the evaluations for the child are put together, and the kid gets what's called a career matchmaker. Here's the career matchmaker. And the state gives them a list of 10 choices that they can pick for a career. And then they have to pick from those choices, and then their whole high school is aimed at having them get to that choice. And you as the parent can look at that, but you can't change it. And what you sign off on, and this is right off of Delaware's website, and what you sign off of, this is the signature page for parents, I have reviewed it or I have not reviewed it. You can make suggestions to the school, but you are not in charge. And that's by 8th grade. Remember, workforce development. When I was in Idaho, the career technology folks were talking about, this is wonderful, by 8th grade the kids are going to be picking their careers. Oh my God. By 8th grade you haven't taken biology or physics or chemistry. So how can you decide you want to be a chemist or a physicist or biologist if you've never been introduced to those subjects? My oldest son is an architect. When he was a freshman and a sophomore in high school, we fought all the time because he was like, Mom, Caesar average, why are you having a problem with this? So we had a 2.9. And at the end of the sophomore year, he said, I think I want to be an architect. And I said, I think you won't. Well, how can you say that? Because to get into architecture school, you need a 4. Did you see this 2? That's not a 4. And you have to like math. And you hate math. And he said, really, I do? And I said, yeah. He said, okay. So he signed himself into all the honors courses, and from that point forward, he got a 4, and he got a scholarship, and he's now a very successful architect in the city of Pittsburgh. But he didn't figure that all out until he was 16. In 8th grade, he would pick garbage man. Because, you know, he was a 13-year-old boy, and that's what 13-year-old boys do. So what happens to him? And what happens if your child is not on the normal path? I have a very odd family. So I have an architect. My daughter's a ballerina. She's a principal dancer in Madison, Wisconsin. And my next son is a Navy nuke. And the next one's a professional opera singer. And the last 2 are engineers. So it's a very weird family. How would they fit in that? How can you decide to be an opera singer at 13? A boy's voice hasn't really even changed yet, and if it has, you know what it sounds like. You can't even start voice lessons for a boy until he's past that stage, what's called Cambiata stage. So that would have never surfaced. But it's not based on what you want, it's based on all of this information that's been collected. So we're actually talking about 2 really different worldviews of education. One, the traditional education says the schools and education is for the kid. And this one says the schools and education are for labor. It's to create a workforce. And that's really underlying this whole thing. That's the competition underneath.
So it actually becomes cheaper than, so how does that tie in with the money thing? For them to figure out where kids are going to go, how does
If you only have the skills you need to do your job, you can't leave that job.
Okay.
You can't go
That's
start your
what I
own
was
business. You can't. This is what you need to do this job. And if we continue with Delaware, since they're the farthest ahead, they signed on to the document's called Tough Choices or Tough Times. The same guy who wrote What Does It Mean to Be College and Work Ready? And they've joined a consortium of states. And what they say is that school will end at the end of 10th grade. So you'll have a preschool and a kindergarten, and then it's called a common score, and it's 10th grade, common school. It ends at 10th grade, you have to take an exam. And if you don't pass the exam, school ends for you.
China.
And if you pass it at a low level, then you go to a technical thing. If you pass it at a higher level, you're allowed to finish high school. Then you take another exam to see if you're allowed to go to college and what you're allowed to take in college. And when they talk about it, they say, well, you know, they do this in Europe, and it's about sorting the children, but we're not really going to sort the children because they could keep taking those exams all their lives. No one would fail. If they didn't succeed, they could just try again. But you can't get past 10th grade unless you pass the test. So you won't get any more education unless you pass the test. And this is what Delaware and 6 other states have signed on to. This is the vision. And what they talk about is that teachers are employed by the state, not the local districts. And we have one assessment. You have to teach the same thing. Schools wouldn't be owned by their districts. The district would only decide the money. And that there would be, the federal government would develop legislation to have the states create regional economic development authorities. They would come up with the strategy, they would coordinate the education and training institutions to make sure that each region's workers develop the skills and knowledge needed to be successful in that labor market.
Wow.
So work for the collective.
That's workforce development.
Okay.
And that's the new commission on the American workforce, and Delaware is a member.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you.
And there's their words. Yes, sir.
First of all, I add my thanks to your fantastic presentation. It's really enlightening. My name is Leo Bluff, and I'm not in education. I'm a grandfather, and I care a lot. My question is are you familiar with what's going on in North Carolina, where they're trying to develop an alternative Common Core?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
They're not the only state. Oklahoma has said no. Indiana said no, but then just changed the name of the Common Core standards, which is what Pennsylvania did. They just changed the name. We're waiting to see what's going to happen in North Carolina. Are they actually doing something different, or are they going to follow the example and just change the name, which is more difficult because what's different, even if it's the same. So we're not sure what the result is going to be. The legislature has said they no. The problem that arises is that until we get rid of the idea that you can standardize children, you can't change it. Because I get this debate all the time, well, if they were just good standards. Do you think any state tried to write bad ones?
Right.
So I told you my daughter's a ballerina. My daughter is a mathematical dyslexic. She read Plato at 16, and she was one of those kids that was linguistic, not numeric. We homeschooled her so she could dance, and she once brought me a time problem. How long does it take with a negative number? And I said, well, that has to be wrong. And she said, why? And I said, time doesn't go backwards. And she went, huh? So, honey, can you get younger? I don't know. Okay, numbers don't mean a thing to this child. Child number 5 is one of my engineers. When he was in his last semester of college, he was a double major, computer and electrical engineering with a math minor. And in his last semester of his senior year, the university said, we've messed things up and you need to take 23 credits to graduate. So of course you'll have to stay an extra semester. And he said, of course I won't, because I'm not paying for an extra semester. So he took 23 400 level engineering credits in one semester. And he made the dean's list. Now, how do I write a math standard that's appropriate for both of those children? There isn't one. There isn't one. Now, multiply that times every child, times every level, times every subject. You can't standardize children. So the idea that if we just write good standards is just ridiculous. And people say, well, what would we do without them? Well, my friend here who's taught for more than 3 decades, I taught long before there was such a thing as standards. So we taught children. I've trained teachers, and I say over and over again, the best teachers on the planet don't teach math and English and spelling and science, and they teach children about math and English and spelling and science. The goal is to enlighten the child. Now, does that mean that we don't have guidelines of basically this is what you should learn in each grade? No, it doesn't. And what you hear is, well, don't you believe in standards? Does healthcare say you all have to have the same blood pressure? No. Does that mean there are no standards in healthcare? Of course not. It means that the standards are not tied. The standards are not tied to the patient. Similarly, the standards shouldn't be tied to the child. They should be things like we should have practices that give every kid possible the opportunity to get as far ahead in math as they can, because we know that's what the research says. Like in healthcare, wash your hands. But until we let go of the notion that education and manufacturing are the same, we're not going to get anywhere. This is not an assembly line. We're not churning out children who have a quality check on their forehead. Every kid will be really different. And see, local control allowed for that. Because then the parents who loved the child and the teacher who had actually met him made decisions about what was best for that child, as opposed to some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. There's a time and a place for politics in this country. Kindergarten classrooms aren't it. And the only way we're going to fix it is to tell Washington, get your fingers off our kids. Go home. That's why there should be no role for the federal government in education. Because you can't mandate children. And that's what they're trying to do. So it isn't just change the standards. It's get the bureaucrats out of the picture. Let teachers teach. We actually did, you know. Mm-hmm. And when the government wasn't so involved, America led the world. Yes. Everybody came here for us. Anyway, there's my soapbox. Question? I think there's one right here.
Okay, over here.
I have one, yeah.
There you go.
This is next.
Make sure that bottom button's on.
Yeah, you have to push it in and hold it. Just hold it
Hold
in.
it till it comes on
Okay.
there. It'll light up.
Yeah, it'll light up.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I keep hearing about and reading about growth mindset, and it seems to be always in an article about Common Core. The article I just read recently was in California, they're going to start testing children's growth mindset. How do you test their, ability, their disposition, their behavior, their wanting to do better or not do better?
There's a lot of ways to do that. Sometimes you embed those questions
That's what
into other things. In Pennsylvania was one of the, we were one of the incubators for that kind of testing. It was actually called the Educational Quality Assessment, the EQA. It was given in Pennsylvania, and so the test said citizenship. That's what parents were getting a test on citizenship. So of course you thought they were testing how many years does the president serve and how old do you have to be a senator. It tested locus of control. Are you an internally motivated person or an externally motivated person? It tested thresholds of behavior change. So the child got a question, and this is an actual one, that said, there's a group called the Midnight Marauders, and they go out and do graffiti, like they do vandalism. I would join the group if my best friend joined, my parents would yell at me. There was no place for the child to say, I won't join the group. They had to say under what conditions they would join the group. They tested for adaptability to change without protest. So the sample question that was given in the documents said, you just found out that your parent got transferred to Outer Mongolia on his job. How much time would you spend doing each of the following? Crying, packing, yelling. And so what you were testing for was how willing is the child to just accept the change without protesting. The EQA then became the basis for federally validated education programs that were called curriculum improvement, curriculum resources for improvement, CRIs, curriculum resources for improvement. We were told the EQA was for Pennsylvania, except the resources were being federally validated in places like Ohio or Louisiana or pick a state. So how could you do that if it was only a state test? It was actually a national, where they were actually testing and then coming up with curriculum to change, to remediate how the child, the locus of control, or their adaptability to change without protest. And those things have been happening in our curriculum for a long time. And they're happening now. So they're really good at it, the folks that have built these kinds of things. The NAEP actually did have that component in it, and Congress stepped in, and that's why the NAEP, although it's been around since the 60s, the test that we looked at tonight was validated in the 90s, because in the late 80s, Congress stepped in, looked at the NAEP and said, what are you doing? Stop. And they forbid the NAEP from testing attitudes, values, opinions, and beliefs. But the NAEP now has a new citizenship test that they're developing, and those of us who are looking at it are beginning to go, oh. So they're tippy-toeing back into that area. So
It's kind of scary.
it is scary. It's not just in the early 90s when we had the last go-around of this, and it was in Pennsylvania. It was a reading test, and I went in and made them show me the test. Now, when you go in to say you want to see the test, what you don't realize is you're not seeing the whole test. It's called a matrix sample. Do you ever play Chinese checkers? So there's 10 marbles, but they're in one little triangle thing. Okay, that's a matrix. So there's multiple forms of the test. Each child takes a particular form, and then they build that all together to get kind of a complete package of that community or that demographic. So when you go in to see the test, you see a form, but it may not be the form that your child sees. You may be looking at a different form of the test. So in this case, in Pennsylvania, there were 10 forms, and I'm sort of pushy, so I got them to show me all 10. So I had to sit in the Department of Education in front of the undersecretary, reading all 10, and he's staring at me the whole time, because, you know, that was going to intimidate me. And so I'm reading, and the story, it was a 5th grade test, and the story was about a child who found a wallet, and there was money in the wallet, and the whole story is about what he did with the money, you know. And I don't remember what he did with the money. So you get to the questions and answers. And the first question said, what did the child in the story find? A wallet. That's literal comprehension, not a problem. Second question. If you, meaning the child taking the test, if you found a wallet with money in it, would you keep the money? And I turned the paper around to the undersecretary and I said, so do you read better if you say yes? Or do you read better if you say no? Or did you just test honesty?
Yes.
On a computerized test with a kid's name on it. And he was just like, but see, a little one wouldn't even think. They're trying to get a good grade, so they wouldn't even think about that question. They would just answer it. So they fit it into stuff like that. In the essay, ways that the essay questions are worded. For example, the new GED test is Common Core compliant. The Washington Times did an analysis using practice materials. So there was that you get a source text and then you have to write about it. So the source text talked all about global warming, that it was a fact and it was because of human industrial activity and population growth. Now, I neither know nor care what you think about global warming. It is the source of one of the biggest debates in America today, and people are lined up on every side of the fence no matter how you add it up. But the child only gets one point of view, and then they're told in a timed test to describe correctly what causes global warming. Well, what if they didn't agree? And you have to use specific examples to support your point of view. Well, what if you didn't agree with the point of view in the essay? Well, so if you agree with the point of view, it's an open book test. But if you don't agree with the point of view, it's a closed book test, because you better know all those numbers out of your head. Because otherwise, how do you support your point of view? And they've already identified that point of view was correct in the way the question was worded. But parents didn't know that we were sorting political beliefs. That was supposed to be a reading test. The source text, the question was about American levels of financial aid, and they talked about our financial aid to Afghanistan and how there's so much corruption and the aid doesn't get down, and that's why those poor Afghans flew their planes into the World Trade Center on 9/11. They weren't Afghans.